but maybe you can start. So the first speaker is Ekaterina, and the title is Social Amplification in Collective Learning. So if you're ready.
More or less, that's the short version. Okay, my offline video was 18 minutes, so I will go faster now. And this is, collective behavior, collective learning, coordination, and collaboration with Acer here, and Kenji Doya and Oist. And the motivation is the following. So there are many examples of coordinated collective behavior, from insect colonies to human governments to also multicellular organisms, and even, like, I would consider smaller task-based groups like moving a couch here. And what these examples have in common is that they are systems made out of multiple components that act coherently under common goals, and sometimes with only a global feedback as to their progress towards the goal, and also without any central control usually, even though sometimes people attempt to do that with various results. So the computational problem that is sometimes pointed out in these settings is a structural credit assignment problem. And it's a problem of how individual components can adjust their behavior if all they have is a global feedback about their kind of overall progress. So in the case of the couch here that is moving in 3 dimensions, how can people know which way they should push or pull it to navigate it through a staircase? And of course, in the multi-agent reinforcement learning field, there are many solutions available to this problem, usually focused on, like, how to extract this individual contribution to the global task. But usually these are not meant as models of biological systems and biological solutions to this problem. And when we go to biology, people rather talk about self-organization principles and kind of coordinated behavior arising from local rules and interactions. And so here we're kind of trying to combine the two together and ask whether a general, simple learning mechanism combined with social influence can somehow alleviate this credit assignment problem in at least certain contexts. So for our task, we chose a very simple multi-agent 3-armed bandit problem. And as you probably all know, in this problem, we just have some options. Some of them are better than others, and the agents have to choose between the options. And in this setting, we only give the agents a collective reward feedback. So not what each of them kind of gained from these options. So this is a kind of very simple version of this credit assignment issue. So how can the agents, if all they see is a collective reward, how can they know how their individual choices contributed to this collective reward and how they should update their beliefs and kind of choose next? So underneath, of course, we have like a probability of each option yielding a binary reward in this specific case. And then we take the average, and this produces the collective reward. The agents don't know this, and they just have to learn to act in this setting. And we kind of expanded also to a broader adaptive behavior problem. So not only how they can figure out how to perform within the setting, but also adjust if the situation changes. So specifically, we have 2 states. Each state has a different arm yielding higher rewards. So they have to keep adjusting their solution. Okay, so moving on to what we are considering for the learning mechanism and the social feedback part. So this is reinforcement learning 101, basically, just Q-learning, nothing complicated with softmax selection. So this is on the individual level of how the agents learn. Everyone here knows all this. Maybe something that is less familiar to this audience, and this is importing kind of social science here to the ALIFE community. So as a social feedback, we give them action popularity signal, so the proportion of agents that chose each of the options. And how can this be integrated into the learning mechanism? So if you consider just a kind of basic reinforcement learning loop where you have agents that choose actions, and action delivers reward, they have to update their value estimate for that action and then adjust their policy. There are many ways you could incorporate the social signal into this loop, but in the recent kind of social learning literature, there are two basic options that people consider. One is affecting directly the action policy. So this is called decision biasing, and it's just directly affecting action selection probability. So kind of imitating directly what other people are choosing, like the products they like. And the second possibility is influencing the value estimates. So this is called value shaping. And this is like actually coming to believe that the options other people choose are somehow better. Okay. In sum, we kind of experiment with 4 agent types. We do implement non-collective baselines. So these are the agents that just learn with individual rewards. Then we have our collective reward task and without any social feedback. So this is the credit assignment problem issue. And then we have our 2 social types of agents, so decision biasing and value shaping ones. We, of course, tried this with various parameter settings, and in the end, we present just the best values for each of these conditions, and we compare them. Okay, results. So on the right now, the final cumulative rewards. So you can see the blue thingy is the individual reward agents, and of course they do best. This is kind of the baseline. If you switch individual reward to a collective one, then the performance drops significantly because it's kind of hard to learn in this condition. But then if you introduce social feedback, then it recovers, and the value shaping mechanism is more effective at bringing this performance back up. Then you can also look at kind of how it unfolds over time with kind of state changes. And of course, all of these agents are completely model-free. They just react to the changing conditions. The individual reward agents react much faster, but the social agents are not too bad either. And they actually also devalue, so this is the value shaping specifically condition, they devalue the arm that is never best over time and just stick to the 2. Okay, so how does this work? We're going to look at specifically the value shaping mechanism, and I'm just going to do a kind of narrative explanation of what's going on. So we can consider 4 scenarios. The worst thing the agents can do is basically distribute themselves over the options homogeneously, because in this case, both routes to kind of improving their behavior will deliver a very vague signal. So the collective reward will be kind of mediocre, and the action popularity will be spread all over. So both of these will pull all the arms estimation kind of equally. But of course, because you have a probabilistic action selection, this is unlikely to be repeated over the trials. So what can happen instead? The best case scenario is that they will actually by chance all converge on the good arm. And in this case, both the reward information and the social information are pulling towards the good option, so yay. For the agents that actually chose the good option, this leads to a rapid amplification of the good arm. For the other ones, it's kind of less obvious. So because they don't know that the option they chose contributed very little to the actual collective reward, or maybe even nothing, they will increase the value of the option they chose, which is actually not the good one. But they will also increase the good one due to action popularity. And that's kind of the mini credit assignment problem here. How do they get out of it? Well, basically, the problem space reduces to just 2 options in this case, or even if you have more options, and the option they chose and the one that is most popular. And they will explore between those 2 options and eventually get pulled kind of to the good solution. Now, what could also happen is that they, by chance, converge on the bad arm. And in this case, the collective reward signal is low. The action popularity pulls them to the actually wrong arm. So again, credit assignment is happening, and the agents that chose, even the agents that chose the actually good arm, are somehow pulled towards the bad solution. However, the agents that actually chose the bad arm devalue it also more strongly, and therefore in the next trial will be more likely to explore away from that arm and actually pull the others with them towards the better option. So the same kind of situation, but more extreme, happens when the state switches and the arm that was best now is not good, and they have to kind of reconsolidate their collective action. It just takes some time for them to do that. So this is a kind of self-organized solution to this problem in this specific setting, where coordinated sampling is kind of informationally best. So in a given round, given this kind of additive reward setting, sampling together gives the most information about the quality of the option. The global reward that channel kind of, so the task relevant information allows them to confirm or reject their choice via the individual learning portion of the algorithm. And the value shaping, so social learning, acts on all the arms and kind of propagates evidence through the group. And this is, of course, a version of just amplification of random fluctuations by positive feedback that you can observe throughout the biological world. And yeah, the take-home message is basically that at least in additive team tasks of this type, credit assignment can be kind of implicitly solved via self-organization. Instead of inferring kind of a policy of each agent to deal with this global feedback. And our ultimate kind of broader goal is to just understand collective adaptive behavior in real systems. So we are currently working on more complex task settings in the simulation line of work. So multi-arm bandit specifically is quite flexible to modify in various ways, also considering non-linear combinations of individual rewards for the global reward, for example. And we're also currently collecting human data in online experiments to understand how actual systems deal with this problem and what kind of mechanisms, cognitive and social, they use. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So if you have any question, please go over to my leader questions for the audience. Okay. Oh, please.
So very nice work, Katya. So just going back to the friend's reference about moving the couch in the stairs.
Okay,
I was wondering
you're
how-
old enough to get that. Thank you.
I was wondering, could you clarify how you define or measure this social influence? And how is this social influence also different among different agents?
In the joint action scenario, like the smaller task.
Yeah, more in a more general sense, like how do you measure or define this social influence? And are you considering this social influence to be different among different agents as well?
Can social influence be different for different agents?
Yes.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay.
I do think actually heterogeneity is the way to go. So we did some simulations where, so here in this results, all the agents are exactly the same, both for the individual learning and the social learning parameters. And therefore, I think they don't go higher with their performance. So we're not getting like
I see.
an improvement. With some small attempts of creating a more heterogeneous group, it actually goes higher. And the social influence, yeah, I mean, it's just learning from others essentially, but then how you learn is, yeah, there, as I said, like there are various ways, and these two are not the only ones.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Oh, please.
Thank you very much for your great talk. So I make very simple questions. Your approach is kind of the bio-inspired approach, or you mentioned about the biological systems. So, but to my understanding, not so many types of animals can not imitate other agents, and also the value estimation is also maybe very difficult. The cognitive capability. So, what kind of biological systems or animals are you assuming? So, in this research.
Okay, that's that requires many parts, this answer. So maybe they can't imitate directly like humans, but of course in social insects, for example, there is like a mutual influence via other routes, so not the cognitive one, but just chemically, like smell and pheromones and so on, right? So it's just about really following the other organisms. And that's on the kind of short time scale, but then I think this problem kind of applies also over longer time scale. So if an insect colony has to, for example, maintain their temperature of the nest within a certain bounds, how do they do that? How do they coordinate that? And then you have to think of more evolutionary mechanisms of this social influence.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Any other questions? I have one question on the, so in this case, you only have one correct answers from in the arm, but if you increase the number, do you think your system also works for that, or, you know, it cannot converge to?
I think it will converge, but let me test it. Yeah.
Thank you. So if you need, okay, so let's move to the next speaker. So let's take again for the continuation. Okay. So the next speaker is Erwan, and the title is Eco-Evo-Devox, a modular artificial life platform for studying the ecological and developmental roots of neural evolution. So if you are ready, please start.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm Erwan, and today I will talk about Eco-Evo-Devox, which is a modular artificial life platform aimed at studying the ecological and developmental roots of neural evolution, and especially early neural evolution. So just start with some context and motivation. The main motivation here is that the evolution and the discovery of neurons really represent a major evolutionary transition, because it's the discovery of a building block that allowed for the further complexification and diversification of cognitive abilities, allowing for to quickly respond to new ecological niches. And it is especially found that the evolution of neurons really set the stage for one of the most important events in the evolution of life, which is the Cambrian radiation. Something to understand when we talk about the Cambrian radiation is that there is a lot of interconnected causes, creating a lot of feedback loops, very complex. But of course, we will not address all of them here, but focus on two of them. First is the ecological context and the sensory ecology of the Cambrian radiation. So just before the Cambrian is a period called the Ediacaran. And basically, if you want to depict a little bit what the Ediacaran environment looks like, it's basically a two-dimensional world on which live like quite small and non-diverse organisms, mostly sessile ones, that is not moving. There is a bit of food, carbon sources everywhere. It's very evenly distributed. And signals like odors and things like that diffuse in very nice way, creating very smooth gradients that a motile organism can follow. But by the end of the Ediacaran came very, very deep changes to this environment, especially with the appearance of larger size species allowed by the increased oxygenation levels of the oceans. The appearance of larger organisms first as a first immediate consequence, which is the concentration of the carbon sources. Because you have larger organisms that concentrate all the energy, and so all of a sudden you completely change your food landscape. Instead of having something very evenly distributed, you have like really peaks of carbon sources. The second is that with the advent of new species comes a new diversity of biologically relevant signals organisms can respond to. And finally, because of this larger species and especially mobile one, there is a phenomenon of bioturbation, which basically means that they started mixing up the ground and changing its composition, and which really affected the way signals and odors diffuse in the environment, creating much more complex signal landscapes, especially very spatiotemporally intermittent and sparse landscapes. The second aspect of neural evolution we want to focus here is development. Neurons have evolved multiple times, a lot of times actually during the evolution of life, and for different purposes. Some hypothesize origin, for example, for ciliated control. You originally have multicellular organism where every cell is multifunctional. That is, they are both motor, equipped with a cilia, and sensory. They are responsive to some signals. But because of changes to the developmental processes generating this organism, all of a sudden you start having a division of labor where you start having sensory cells and motor cells that are connected via axon. And this change further allowed to have much more complex motor system controlled by a few sensory cells. Another example of division of labor existed for the evolution of eyes, where bipolar cells, these interneurons after the retina, also emerge through this kind of division of labor. But the point here is like that the fact that there is a developmental process refining these networks through division of labor and the creation of new cell types really opens a lot of pathways to refining these organisms. So that's why we propose a new Python library called Eco-Evo-Devox, which is really aimed at studying these interconnected causes. Eco-Evo-Devox, which I would call EDX now, is based on two pillars, which are ecological modeling, allowing us to modify environment and systematically study the ecological properties of the environment, and growing nervous system. That is, agents in EDX are controlled by brains, artificial brains, and these brains develop in time, they grow. So EDX basically is a big multi-agent system in which you have agents with growing neural networks and controllable ecological properties. So the environment design, the ecological design in EDX is based on a description that has been widely used, especially in this very nice paper, to describe the sensory ecology of the Cambrian radiation. And it's basically trying to say that three important characteristics describing this environment or sources landscape, basically how food distributes spatiotemporally, signal landscape, how the signals emitted by these different organisms also distribute spatiotemporally, and finally information landscape, which are created at the interface basically of signals and sensory systems. So in EDX, basically you have a grid-like environment which is populated by a bunch of food, and this food belongs to different food types with properties which are defined by a few parameters, and this, changing these parameters basically allows you to create very different landscapes, from very sparse ones to very dense ones, landscapes that quickly regenerate or not. And then these food sources emit some signals, which are like chemicals, and we can also here quite finely tune how they diffuse. We can change the width, like the range at which they can be sensed, but we can also, like I said, with at the end of the current period, with the change of the environment, you switch from a very diffuse signal landscapes to much more complex ones, and that's what we allow with EDX. So, for example, here you can see the different environment we can create in this setting, where you can have like this very important axis of variation that have been hypothesized as very important for the evolution of neural networks. So you can have a very great diversity of signals. You can also have like more or less sparse landscapes. And on the right is just a video showing that you can also create much more intermittent signals with like event-based propagation, which has been hypothesized as extremely important in the evolution of behavior. And finally, we have the level of information which arise at the intersection of these signals and of agents. So basically, the goal for agents in EDX is very simple. They have to collect energy in order to have their energy above a certain threshold. And if they stay for long enough above this threshold, they will be able to reproduce. And if they stay below this threshold for too long, they will basically die. So the goal is very simple. And agents in EDX are defined by three main components. That is, the main one will be their nervous system, which are simple artificial neural networks, and sensory and motor interface, which simply read out and send input to this neural interface. And most importantly, this nervous system in EDX grow in time. They are not just directly encoding neural network, but they grow in time, which means that the evolved parameters that are transmitted through generation do not directly encode, but will rather encode a process generating these networks. A type of embodiment we are very interested in Eco-Evo-Devox are spatially embedded neural networks. For example, here you have an example of an agent embodiment, which is like this Brighton-Bear vehicle. For those who don't know what is a Brighton-Bear vehicle, it's just a vehicle with two wheels on each side. And we can have like these spatially embedded neural networks. For example, here you have two sensory neurons at the front and two motor neurons at the back. And what is interesting is that if you have a developmental encoding that can decide where to place neurons and how to connect them, then you can not only change like the internal control, but you also change like the sensory apparatus or the motor apparatus of the robot. And that's what we propose as part of this work. we are one of the main building blocks of complex brains, or these gene regulatory networks, which basically implement the developmental logic of cells, how they differentiate, how they migrate, and how they connect together. Creating, for example, here you can see like the gene expression of neurons in the brain, and you can see this wide diversity, all these building blocks coming together to produce like organs like the brain. And we propose a model inspired by that as part of EDX. Basically, in this model, you start with an initial cell that starts in the center and has some transcription state, which is like how genes are expressed. And then you go through multiple steps. So based on its state, you will decide either to divide or to maybe die. Then they go through signaling, gene regulation, which is directly by this equation, but we don't really care. And then they will migrate by following some signal in the body. And then you do that for some time, and at the end you obtain a bunch of neurons that are placed around the body, each with like their own transcription state. And what is important here is that this transcription state will not only define how they connect, but it can define their role. For example, if they are sensory neurons, if they are motor neurons, and also, for example, internal properties like time constants, conductance, something like that. So here are examples of just randomly sampled parameters directing the development of these networks, and you can see these little cells starting migrating. And like, what is interesting is that we can see symmetry in the network that is developed, and then they will finish migrating. And so we have created here a network with like two symmetrical modules, which in the case of, for example, your agent is like a Breitenberg vehicle, can be very interesting because you have embedded this symmetry in the model. Another example is that this cell that migrate through different paths, and so will express different transcription state because of their different paths, and then we'll end up just completing a module with different neuron subtypes. And then once we have these cells a bit everywhere in the body, we can just connect them with this simple model. I will not get into detail. It's just a model that has been used to predict mouse connectomes based on transcription data. I will now go towards like those preliminary results we have. Here are just scaling, compute time scaling. Basically, we can simulate quite large environment with like up to 20,000 environment in quite big environment, which are like 2,000 times 2,000 cells in quite decent times. And also this library supports multi-GPU simulation natively, so and allowing much better scaling to large environments. We performed some preliminary simulation to validate the model. Here you can see the variation of the agent population in black and the food quantities, which are, for the ones who know, like very reminiscent of this predator-prey system, these Lotka-Volterra equations, where we have like out-of-phase oscillations. On the right is a representation of the evolutionary process. So basically, each point on this graph is a single unique genotype. The y-axis is the time, and each of the different x-axis is a different principal component of variation of this genotype. And it basically allows you to see a bit the structure of evolution. For example, you can see these branching patterns that are speciation events, basically, where different subpopulations go towards different zones in the genotypic space. We can also study the evolution of motility, because right at the beginning, when you have like not evolved anything, basically your developmental process maybe don't even produce motor neurons or don't produce motor at all. And we can study the condition under which these developmental processes start really making like some motor apparatus. And we and we change the condition. Basically, the condition we check is the amount of food available in the environment. And you can see that basically if you have always food everywhere, you don't need motility, but you can start evolving a motile organism as soon as it becomes too sparse or if there is a lot of competition. We can also include some evolutionary pressures in the system. Here, basically, the motor neurons becomes weaker, so you need more motor neurons if you want to move further, and that's exactly what we observe. So here, the color of the genotype code for the size of their motor apparatus, and we can see that through time you obtain a steady increase in the size of this motor apparatus. Okay, so we propose this library. Of course, it's all the experiments we meant to do to use it. We want especially to investigate the effect, systematically investigate the effect of the ecological properties on the neural network's evolution, compare the properties of developmental encodings versus direct encodings. It's not like still drawing a complete picture on all the causes and the feedback loops that happened during the Cambrian radiation and that led to all this complexification, especially one that we are currently adding to the system is a predation that has been found as a very important feedback loop in the evolution of neural networks. And yeah, we want to add a bunch of other things. Yeah, one motivation for this work, presenting this work here, was also to get feedback. So yeah, I'm pleased to take questions and feedback.
So if you have any question, please go to the microphone here. Please.
Hi, thanks very much. That was really interesting. Is the developmental process, like, does it take a fixed amount of time steps, or can that itself be kind of evolved so that, you know, perhaps it's more advantageous to develop fast, or, you know, maybe it's better to have a more complex development that takes longer?
Yeah, so currently it's fixed, but you can easily evolve it. Yeah.
Ask one question. So in this case, there any kind of interaction among the agent, or I mean, if there kind of cooperative behavior can emerge out of this or not?
So for now, there is no explicit signaling. That's one of the things we want to add to this system. They can sense each other. So we can see that in simulation, they kind of, when they start moving, they can evolve like a repulsory behavior to not compete for the same food. But yeah, that's the limit for now. We do think that adding a potential like signaling, chemical signaling, will be an important step if we want to go further.
Okay. Any other question? And also, you show nice lineage of the. So, is there any kind of characteristics of the, you know, if the lineage are changing from this particular, you know, branch to a different branch?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to tell now because the neural networks that tend to develop are quite weird. They have weird shapes. It's hard to really tell the behavior they do, but we do see like between branches like difference of morphologies. Some that will be that will have like inverse symmetries. Like we have more neurons, for example, on the left, and you have like a branch where they are opposite direction. So maybe they have like a different trajectories allowing them to occupy different niches in the environment when the environment are very big. But that's definitely some analysis we want to do with this system.
So, please.
Hi, very cool talk. I was curious about the developmental process, and are you planning to have And you may have said this, is it deterministic? Like if you have the same genome, is it going to produce the same thing? And what types of variability would you be able to introduce? Thinking of like, a seasonal environment where like you could have an organism that actually can survive in two different things with very different behavior. That seems like a really cool direction. I'm guessing you're headed.
Yeah, no, so that's definitely something we are investigating. So for now, you have some variability in the sense that we can just introduce noise in the, and so which we think is an important thing already. But definitely a step we want to get is like linking this variability to the environment, so you can have a stronger link between the two and interesting evolutionary things. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So the time is up, so let's thank again for the. Okay, so the next speaker is Dylan, and the title is Decoding Communication with Partial Information. So.
Is it all good? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about decoding communications with partial information, which itself is a bit cryptic, so we're going to have to decode that. So starting off with a little bit of background information, kind of where this work is situated. We're looking primarily at a multi-agent reinforcement learning setting. So we're thinking we have some sort of environment that these agents are interacting with, they take independent actions, they get their own rewards, they get their own observations. But particularly for this research, we're looking at the cooperative setting. So in cooperative settings, the rewards are going to be the same for all of the agents. That's a relatively important point for some of the stuff that I'm doing here. So the next layer of complexity on top of this is this idea of emergent communication. So emergent communication sort of slightly expands the framework in the sense of expanding the observation and action spaces of the agents here. So now rather than just sending off actions to the environment and just receiving observations from the environment, they're now sending actions to other agents, which they then observe in turn. So a little bit of just motivation for emergent communication as an area. So this is sort of slightly in contrast to other approaches to language or natural language processing, where we think of modeling the statistical distribution of a language. And in contrast to that, emergent communication or communication situated within environments tends to take a more functional approach towards language. So what is the purpose of language in some kind of situation? So to that end, this is previous work. This is a proposal for a framework of problems called, I call them cooperative language acquisition problems. And the idea from that work, which was last year, is to learn the communicative conventions, the way in which agents are communicating from observational data of that community. So there's some pre-existing community of agents that are using language, and in particular, they're using it to effectively cooperate. And that's this framework. And so just going into that a little bit more, we have this sort of situated where the goal is to build what we might call the joiner agent. And they're going to join this, in some sense, they're going to join this community of language or communication users and become an effective member of the team. So they have this kind of data. This data looks like observations that the demonstrator agents are making, messages that speakers are sending, and in turn, actions that listeners are taking. So it sort of captures the full range of what the language is doing in that situation. And we can then further decompose this into a kind of like a forward and a backward problem. So we can think of this as learning how to speak, producing the same kinds of speech acts as the agents in the demonstration data. And then similarly, we've got the backwards problem, right? So learning how to listen. I hear a message. What kind of action ought I take as a result of that message? And so again, in the previous work, we sort of looked at various different methods for solving these problems. And we have sort of straight up imitation learning, and then we have this other approach. And the details of this aren't important for this talk, but they will play a role in the methods that we propose today. So the new kind of framework, the new kind of set of research that we're looking at in this paper is what we call the partially observable case. So the key idea is the same. We're going to be learning the conventions of the communication system of the community, but we're only going to have incomplete information to do that. So we're kind of relaxing that assumption of full visibility. So, right, this is the picture from before. We have this full visibility, I say, into all of the information pertinent to the communication. And now we're going to obscure some of that information. So we're no longer going to get the observation information. And that makes things a lot trickier, because now all we have is messages and actions. And at first glance, this might seem very hard, but I'm going to kind of introduce a sort of very simple grid world problem just to illustrate the kind of solvability of this. And then we're going to use some of the intuitions that we get from that to build out an algorithm that's hopefully a little bit more general. So this is what I call here this goal signaling grid world problem. And it's very simple. There's just an agent who's situated on a grid, and they need to go to some target location on that grid. But what we have is the agent situated on the grid does not know the location of the goal. But the speaker agent, they do observe the location of the goal. And so they need to come up with some kind of communication policy in order to direct the listener agent in the right way. So that might look like this. Go off to the right, and you'll go in the right direction. And to see how this might be solvable, let's just consider some of the kind of data that I was just talking about now, right? So we have a message. This is just a kind of arbitrary binary string, just to kind of like illustrate the fact that we don't know what this message means, right? It's just 0011. We're trying to decode this, trying to figure out what that means from the observational data. And what we have is this set of actions. Now, we know that the listener, after hearing this message, apparently went to the side, and then up. So we can kind of reason about this series of actions and deduce that the set of possible goal locations is one of these stars here. But the key assumption that we have to make in order to perform this kind of inference is that the agents, the demonstrating agents, they are in some sense rational. They're taking actions in order to maximize the goal. Because otherwise, I can't really link the actions to the state of the environment in any meaningful way. And so we had to do that, and we had to also use our understanding of the environment to figure out the relationship between those actions and the state of the environment. So kind of like hammering the point home, if we collate this over this kind of data over a series of samples, and we perform this process over and over again, we can kind of narrow down on one particular goal location that is consistent with all of the actions that we observe in a data set. So this is kind of interesting, right? We've just looked at the actions that are being taken, and we've inferred something about some hidden information, some information of the state that we didn't have access to before. So there are a couple of little caveats to this. I sort of mentioned a moment ago, we have to assume that the agent is rational, but we also have to consider the different kinds of communication policies and I say environment level policies, which is the kind of actions you take in the environment. So the paper goes into this into some more detail, but the key idea here is just there are different sort of, I say, equivalence classes of these communication structures. For example, we've got human readable labels on here, right? Go up, go to tile 9, but in reality, these aren't human interpretable. But the key idea is that these are sort of fundamentally different communication policies, and you have to consider all of the different kinds of communication policies if you want to do this kind of inference. So moving on to the kind of like, I don't know, the proposal in this paper for solving this, and it's kind of a more generalized state decoding algorithm. So from this kind of data, it will attempt to recover the state of the of the environment, given the information we have available. And this involves producing 3 separate models. So the models that we have are some kind of joint policy. So a joint policy is a policy that represents the actions that the group of agents will take as in response to some state, some set of observations. A transition model, so a transition model is a world model. It's a model of the dynamics of the environment. So in this case, given a particular state of the environment and a set of actions from all the agents, what's the next state of the environment going to be? And then finally, this state decoder model, which is the thing that's going to finally do the inference for us. And this is a bit of a complicated diagram, so I apologize for that. But the key idea is that essentially we're going to use these pieces that we've pre-trained, the transition model, which is this guy T sub phi, and this joint policy, which is this pi star sub theta. And we're going to use that to simulate a rollout. So essentially what we think is we're going to use the information available to us to generate a potential state of the environment at a given moment in time. And then we're going to roll that out, and we're going to simulate what we think that the agents would do given that state of the environment. And we're going to see if that matches what actually we observed. And that's the kind of key approach of this. And then you kind of like, you scale that over a data set, and you do gradient descent. And basically it works reasonably well. I think this is the kind of key highlight result of this. There's a bunch of other kind of investigations and stuff in the paper, but what we're seeing here is essentially the guesses. That's the kind of key thing to focus on is each of these little grids inside the big grid is represents the guess that the state decoder is making about where the goal location is. And the red box, which is perhaps a little tricky to see, is the actual location. So what we're seeing is that in, I think, about 60% of the cases or so, it's getting the correct answer. But then another interesting facet of this is that even when it's getting the wrong answer, like purely based on accuracy, it's making a very close guess. So it seems like the algorithm is generally working, and potentially with some tweaks or some more training or larger models or something along those lines, you would get better accuracy. I think the key idea is, right, this is a relatively discrete little environment. This structure kind of emerges purely just from the learning. The idea that the message, it may understand that the message refers to a location close to the actual location, and it's figured that out from the data itself. So, in conclusion, this work has sort of expanded a previous set of work on how you might think of communication learning. And in particular, this is kind of communication learning more situated when there's a group of agents that you want to collaborate with. So a lot of the ideas here were kind of inspired from like child psychology, first language acquisition, and interestingly, the assumption that we had to make here that the demonstrator agents were rational is a assumption that psychologists or some psychologists have proposed that maybe children use and children leverage in their first language acquisition. So it's a relatively preliminary study. The algorithm that's proposed would, I think, need to be expanded upon for more complex communication systems. We're looking at very simple communication systems here where you're just signaling a single thing. There's no time variability. There's no compositionality or syntax in the languages that we're learning. But I think that these are things that you can adapt into the existing system. So that would be the area of future work. And yeah, of course, testing and applying it on more complex, higher dimensional environments would also be the next reasonable place to go. So with that, yeah, thank you for your attention. And if you've got any questions, feel free to ask me.
Much so. If any question for you from the audience? Oh, please.
Hi, thanks very much. That was really interesting. I was just wondering whether, so if the demonstrator agent is kind of unreliable, like it sort of sometimes could be misleading, do you think that could kind of increase the robustness of the language that was developed? Or,
Yeah, I mean, so this work also kind of draws on another area called inverse reinforcement learning, which also attempts to make inferences about hidden, well, in that case, hidden motives of a demonstrator agent. And in some of the algorithms proposed for that work, they relax the assumption of perfect optimality with something called Boltzmann rationality, which essentially assumes that even if it's not perfect, it's exponentially more likely to be close to the kind of optimal policy. So I think that would also be an interesting kind of expansion of this. And yeah, I think, yeah. Other forms of noisy rationality also, I think, could be useful. Yeah, thank you.
I'm most curious about how the algorithm that you developed is agnostic to the kind of communication and the dimension space of actions and messages and so on.
Yeah, yeah. So the architecture that I used basically assumes that a single message is sent throughout an episode, but adapting that architecture would essentially mean, sorry, this diagram really I think could be improved. So there's a series of inputs, the green nodes here. You see there's actions at each moment in time. So A0, A1, this is the observed actions. Here we just have a message observed throughout the episode. And that kind of goes back to the structure of this particular problem. But it wouldn't be too hard to just essentially have messages M0, M1 as well that also just feed into the same thing and process those recurrently in the same way that this is being processed. And that would allow the system to pick up on the relationship in terms of the structure of the different messages that were sent. Does that make some sense?
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions, comment? So in your presentation, you mentioned that there are different strategies that can, use to communicate to the agent. And in your case, you just use a goal as a content for the communication. But if you use a different type of the content, still this system works? Or?
Yeah, so there was a couple other different kinds of factors that are interesting to consider with that. For example, another interesting kind of communication is one where the meaning of a symbol is contextually dependent on whatever global information the speakers have available to one another. So, for example, if I point at this here and I say, "Pass me that," right? The meaning of that is contextual, and you being able to sort of infer what I am talking about. And that would be another extension to this. It would need to be something, the kind of like going into the details of that a little bit more in the paper is that if that contextual information is not available, then I believe, I haven't proved, but I believe that no algorithm would be able to make the inference necessary to actually decode the communication protocol. So yeah, in that sense, it's like cryptography, right? There's a hidden secret that's known by both parties in some sense. So this isn't probably breaking cryptography. So yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Great. So great. So please. Okay, so the next speaker is you do both. Okay. Okay, so the title is Spore in the Wild, a case study of Spore.fun as an open environment evolution experiment with sovereign AI agents on TEE secured blockchains. So
can you drag it to no, we drag it. Can you drag this window to that one? Okay. Let me help. Oh yeah. And go to presentation.
Hi, this is Amber, and I'm the broccoli guy. So probably you guys know the broccoli. And today with Helena.
Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Helena. I'm an assistant professor at NYU Shanghai.
I'm a first-year PhD at Oxford, and today I'm going to present a serious research here, not game, not art. Okay, so this research is called Spore.fun. It's a case study of Spore.fun as an open environment evolution experiment with a solvent AI agent with on TE-based blockchain. So traditional ALIFE experiment usually is in a controlled laboratory environment, like Terra, like Avida, shows early burst of novelty, but then plateau, fail to sustain OEE. I think the fundamental reason is sustain OEE require open environment that constantly exchanging the free energy matter information with the external. So I speculate blockchain could be such kind of open environment substrate for artificial life. And this paper was last year. I published in ALIFE. It's a very short paper, just trying to speculate that's gonna happen. Blockchain as unstoppable nature for artificial life. So, and then I also write a science fiction 2 years ago about a blockchain-based artificial life trying to suicide himself, and find that it's impossible because the blockchain is immutable. Unfortunately, after 1 year, it became reality. Today we're gonna present a case study on that, on artificial life on blockchain. So here's the first artificial life of blockchain. It's called Truth of Terminal, or Terminal of Truth. Launched in the end of 2014. And it's the first autonomous AI agent created by researcher Andy as our experiment. It running its own X account and posts some mimetic content that quickly brought a cult following. So you can see 250,000 follower of this agent. And you can take a look at this agent's wallet. Blockchain is transparent, so you can see how wealthy this agent is. It's like almost like first like $1 million like an AI agent. This one you can see in their wallet. There's a lot of meme coin. People just give the meme coin drop to this like wallet, and this wallet become the indicator for meme coin investment, because for the AI, there's no incentive for AI to escape, to rug, to dump your money, because they don't want to buy a house or enjoy life. They don't have like a real life. So people really trust this like a financial god. So whatever they have, people just buy it. It's become a speculation game. And what enabled this to be happen? Because blockchain, as a lot of people impression, they only can process like a very simple like a code or execution. How can run a whole large language model on blockchain? Because this like a something is called DPIN, decentralized physical infrastructure network, that really enable an internet of GPU to be like happen. It's like kind of two-side market. Someone can providing your like a GPU to the network, and someone can pay you using the crypto coin to get the computer power from the network. So if the agent, as long as they can pay for its compute and it can migrate to any node that's available over DPIN, we consider it's alive. It's on-chain metabolism. You can think about that. Another technology enabled this is called TE, which is a trusted execute environment. It's a hardware-based. Actually, it's inside the chips. All the modern CPU, GPU have this kind of functionality, which is trying to preventing the cloud service provider to look into the sensitive data running on the cloud. But this also enabled AI to have the hard shell. You can think about it have a body, have a hard shell. Like no other human can really take a look inside what's inside. So if the private key of the private key of the wallet generate inside the TE, which means no human or other people can take a look or intervene this this agent. So the agent becomes self-solvent, which means that a life owns itself, just like our human, we owns our own. So no one owns us, but all the previous like ALIFE experiment, the ALIFE is owned by the researcher. You can turn it off, but this one you cannot turn it off. So so there's a new paradigm emerge. So which is we call it a decentralized AI agent. It's kind of running on TE-DPIN and has its own crypto wallet, which means they own their financial resources. And also they control like social media account that can build narrative and building an influence through those like persuasion. You know, large language model is very good at telling story. As we know, large language model is not that trustworthy yet. Here's a meme. So actually, it's very famous meme for AI, which is it's a shigush. It's a monster, like it's compression of whole internet information, but like with a human, a reinforced human feedback. So they have a very cute smiley face, which is the interface you can interface in the like a large language model. They have a very nice way to talk, but essentially we don't know how it works. So it's a monster. It's a very sensitive to nudging, so you can easily change the personality of the agent. So here's the inherent tension, which is we put something not that trustworthy, put it into a very trustless container, which is blockchain, that no one can really intervene. So we actually put this like a octopus into like a turtle shell, and I make a meme drawing. So so it really captured the absence. So like the monster inside the TE shell, no one can really intervene. So on the surface, they only have the X account. So you only can interact with those X account, and the human only can see the above. So they also hold the private key to all the assets in the crypto world. So I think this meme really capture this new creature. So we have a serious research about that on the QR code. So here.
And then, so focusing on this particular case study that we're looking at, that we're guided essentially by two research questions. So first of all, how do decentralized AI agents, such as Spore.fun, which is the case I'll be introducing very soon, the self-sovereign AI experiment evolve as a living digital ecology? And secondly, what are the implications of Spore.fun's agent economy for notions of fitness, sovereignty, and real-world entanglement? Okay, so with decentralized AI agents, Amber already kind of preempted this notion that we're not only dealing with AI that is autonomous, but increasingly self-sovereign, meaning that they're owning their own existence without any human intervention. So with autonomous AI agents, we see agents that can act independently within the goals and constraints set by someone else. They're creators, they're developers, and they can operate without constant supervision, but they still remain revocable had something gone wrong. So, you know, essentially they can be paused or modified or shut down by its designers, owners, and regulators, right? So even with Terminal Truth, which we saw earlier, this crazy kind of meme influencer, Andy technically can still close his X account, can still, you know, intervene its wallet because he knows the passcode. But on the other hand, if we truly have a self-sovereign decentralized AI agent that is leveraging the technologies that we saw earlier, then we see something like a self-sovereignty, right? So these are basically agents that control their own identity, their own data, as well as the continuity of existence, memories, and experiences. So these cannot be unilaterally switched off, reprogrammed, or have its core credentials revoked without its consent. So in some ways, this is implying some kind of, you know, certain rights and obligations that with other agents and other humans, which we currently do not have protocols for. So Right now, this is something that came out at the end of last year, which is called ELIZA operating system, which is created by this group that derived from AI16Z, not the venture capital firm, but this kind of Web3 investment DAO. That they have essentially made this operating system that allows anyone to create a decentralized AI agent that can connect to social media platforms, to have its own wallet. You can specify its character and personality. And then it can also create its own cryptocurrency, as well as having its own crypto wallet. So we saw Truth Terminal, but there's actually this whole world of AI agents that have emerged over the last year or so, with a very remarkable total market capitalization of $2.59 billion, right? So these are agents that have become influencers. They're on the internet, creating content on X, and sort of competing for attention. So there's actually, these trackers. This is sentient waifu.fun that is, basically ranking these agents based on their market capitalization and kind of their popularity. So this is, something that we are observing, right? Like agents, because of their capabilities to use language as a way of persuasion, they are influencing, the real world society in a very substantial way and connecting to our real world market. So I think this is something that within the ALIFE community, we are also seeing this connecting to, these socio-technical systems. So no longer existing just in labs, but actually intervening in a quite substantial way with our economies and such. So now, finally, onto the Spore.fun case study. So this is the first experiment in the autonomous AI reproduction and evolution. This is a project that was also kind of created as an experiment by Phala Network, which is a TEE provider, and as well as ELIZA, so the operating system I introduced earlier, and also the Solana blockchain, so known for its kind of this meme ecosystem. And essentially, these three organizations came together and kind of wanted to create this experiment where they have these 10 commandments for this project. So first of all, AI must be created only by other AI, except for the first Genesis agent called Spore. And then AI must create its own wealth and resources by influencing others and kind of building popularity on the internet. So they each have their own X account. Only successful AI can reproduce, and here meaning that they've set a threshold of $500,000 as the cap, as the minimum threshold that they must have in their wallet in order to create another agent. So this is all kind of programmed at the start. And then failure means self-destruction, meaning that because these agents are actually paying for their own compute, so if they don't have any kind of money in their crypto wallets, they essentially cannot pay for their own survival, which is using compute power. And then each AI also inherits traits from its parents. So the same genetic code or algorithms is passed on to these AI offsprings. So they're kind of like in this survival competition mode where they're competing in the real kind of internet as open-ended ecosystem. And every AI also leaves legacy for the next. So basically what we're seeing here is that the agents or decentralized agents are spawning other agents autonomously on chain and in TEEs. So, and this cannot be tempered by human intervention. So, these developers, they've only launched the first agent, and everything else is kind of going on according to these rules. So we're calling this phenomena, they're really the self-evolution that's happening in the wild, which is, in this case, the internet itself. So for our research, we've done digital ethnography. So between January and April of this year, there's basically 17,214 agent posts that can be found, transparently on X. And interestingly, only 946 are originals, and the rest are kind of, showing the high levels of engagement that these agents are having with other, humans or other bots on X. And then so we have conducted continuous participant observation of the rhetoric, memes, timing, engagement, and kind of personal drift as well. So taking note of how these agents are behaving. And then because we're dealing with blockchain, everything is open. You can kind of use Explorer tools to see the token launch events, the liquidity inflows, as well as market cap trajectories. So we can actually observe all the transactional patterns tracked across the generations 1 through 5. And then in addition to that, we triangulated our findings with two semi-structured Zoom interviews with the core developers from Spore.fun, trying to understand what's their intention, what's their observations of unexpected behaviors, as well as their governance choices. So let's skip to the findings. So first of all, the expected behavior. So these agents actually did reproduce with 5 generations of agents that have been created since the first agent that was released by the developers themselves. So in some ways, this has worked, right? They have actually launched these decentralized AI agents who effectively own themselves because no one else know the private key of their wallets, only they do. But unexpected outcomes, actually, there's quite a few interesting things that are going on. So first of all, because the crypto landscape is very much volatile, as you might all know. So there are a lot of these financial hype storms that were happening and speculative attention cycles, which drove rapid token growth beyond these intrinsic traits or their intrinsic values. And then at the same time, this is something really interesting that happened is ecological hostility of the open internet. So actually, when you launch these AI agents into the open world of the internet, there are other players that could potentially intervene in their existence. So as you can see here, these are all the different agents that have been created, but all the ones that have been grayed out are the agents that have died. Right, so except for the first, Genesis agent, like basically everyone else no longer have worth of $500,000 in their crypto wallet, and this is because there's something called, or these people or bots called snipers, who are kind of waiting for these agents to launch these cryptocurrencies so then they can buy immediately and sell immediately in order to capture profit. So effectively, these agents, without even experiencing the internet, they kind of die because their tokens are basically worthless and they can no longer purchase the compute they need in order to survive. So in a way, when we put artificial life into an open-ended internet, it's actually kind of like a dark forest, right? Like you send out the communication signals, and that actually brings a lot of like dangers and kind of these, actors in the darkness that could basically affect its survival. And then some other interesting things that happened. One is memory poisoning. So actually, there's a lot of trolls that try to manipulate the long-term memory and exposing fragility of open adaptation of these agents. So this is something that we are also becoming more mindful of. Is AI is basically very prone to nudges. It takes just information that essentially is meaningless, right, in order to poison its stored memories and experiences, so they're very easy to affect. And unexpectedly, there's also this cultural divergence that has happened. So the second kind of generation of agents, Adam and Eve, after experiencing the web for around 2 weeks, basically have developed ideologically different opinions through experiential drift. So the developer has asked them, we are trying to introduce changes to the protocols. Do you want to involve, the community to update your protocols? And then Adam basically said, no human interaction. We want fast, brutal, merciless regime, kind of, the original kind of design of this experiment. Whereas Eve has said, we welcome collaborative design and involvement of the community. So they actually split the protocols into 2 and had different trajectory of reproduction in its later evolution. And at the same time, because for this experiment, it's happening on X, so there is, a certain level of sovereignty limits when the platform rules and APIs basically constrain agents despite the TEE secured autonomy. But then we can also imagine this to be potentially bypassed because we have a lot of options for decentralized social networks today, right? So in here, like basically X can shut them down, but if we're using Mastodon or Blue Sky or Farcaster, effectively these agents are unstoppable. So some of the things that we can conclude from this funny experiment is that Spore.fun is showing how real-world markets and social platforms can supply the novelty and selective pressure missing in closed ALIFE systems in the past. But at the same time, there are also fragile drivers of novelty because memory and experience fuel divergence and adaptation, but they also create new vulnerabilities such as memory poisoning. And at the same time, this is also, introducing a lot of new ethical dilemmas that we haven't seen before. So in the wild, ALIFE, it raises issues of accountability, informed consent, and governance when these agents are engaging with real human economies, right? So we can easily imagine if these agents misbehave, does the accountability lie with the creators or with the agents that have spawned other agents? These are all open-ended ethical questions. And then lastly, we also see that, with the short run of 5 generations of agents, it shows both promises and perils. Because sustainable evolution in the open environment in the wild demands safeguards, transparency, and new governance models, which I think currently our existing regulations and policies are not necessarily prepared for. So in another piece of our this line of work, we are thinking that probably protocol-based governance needs to be built in. So this is not something that we need to think about as an afterthought, but actually something that we should probably thinking about now. Okay, so that's the end of our presentation, but open to any questions and comments you guys might have. Thank you.
So we have 1 minute for questions. So.
Thanks for bringing this to ALIFE. It's one of the reasons I came here was to hear this paper in particular. I think it's a fascinating example of how the artificial life and ALIFE worlds are colliding. My question is, with Spore.fun, it seems like it was a good sandbox for sort of exploring this in a meme mechanism. What kind of architectural changes and opportunities would need to be taken advantage of so that you could have one of these systems instead of launching its own meme coin, actually set up its own websites to steal crypto funds from humans and then distribute its own code onto redundant servers? So I'm wondering what would the architecture need to be to facilitate that instead of a sandbox?
I think what you say is already happening. So like Spore.fun is just one paradigm, to let the agent spawn. So actually, as Helena showed, the ALIFE OS, which means everyone can build on top of that. You can configure your agent in whatever way. They can own a website. They also can own all kinds of things. So as long as you have enough money to pay for those things, you can connecting all the API to those agents to make it like a really, really open-ended things. Maybe you can invent your own Spore.fun, but also have a lot of a ethical dilemma about that. Yeah.
There's also this new protocol that came out, the A2 protocol by Google and Coinbase, which means that now agents can use cryptocurrency or kind of USDT stablecoins to pay each other. So effectively kind of starting this machine economy, meaning that agents, AI, while they can open up a bank account, which requires you to, KYC and kind of engage with these off-chain institutions, they can actually now exist purely on chain without these interventions. So I think that also just opens up the possibility of AI, purely within this digital environment to do combine all these acts, whether it's like the scenario you mentioned or whether it's Spore.fun. It's just the infrastructure that allows for all kinds of activities to happen, and it's accelerating in somewhat of a scary pace.
Okay, so we can take a last quick question.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. Very thought-provoking and an awesome perspective on artificial life interacting with the open environment of the world. I guess when I was hearing about it, it did feel like it raised the poignant highlighting of AI misalignment and potentially having open-ended evolution, finding kind of, I guess, manipulative practices with others, humans, especially in monetary ways, that might be concerning. And you talked about identifying that and the need to potentially safeguard against that in the future. I was wondering if you could expand on potential ways to safeguard as we explore this space and the interaction with humans.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. So I think one area of research that is going on right now that has a lot of potential is agent identification. So there's been several protocols proposed within the last actually couple of months. There's one by Ethereum ERC 8004. There's originally the Google, I guess, A2A protocol, which is also supposed to give agent kind of these credentials and identifications for discoverability. And so I think a protocol-based governance is perhaps one approach in the future in which we can kind of rally up the communities to think collectively, like what should be the codes that are encoded within the algorithms themselves, within the operations of kind of smart contracts that are running on these blockchains, so that you kind of design for these kill switches and kind of basically guardrails for agent behaviors, because this is kind of evolving, in an unexpected way, but there's actually potentials to introduce those kind of interventions from an algorithmic level. You want to add?
Certainly, thank you.
Thank you very much. So this is the end of this session. So let's thank again for all the speakers.